Welcome everybody to another great Test and Learn community conversation. Today we're going to talk about prioritization. And our panelists today are Val Kroll of UBS. She's currently the Director of Digital Analytics and Optimization. In her past life, she established the digital analytics practice for the American Medical Association back in 2013, and she is a return panelist who we enjoyed so much we invited her back again. Then we have Merritt Aho, of Dun & Bradstreet. He's the Marketing Director of Testing and Optimization there. He established and lead that global testing practice. And prior to that, in an earlier life, he actually worked with Melanie Hall and I at Dell, managing their testing program.
The glory days.
The glory days. Oh, the glory days. So welcome back, Merritt. Thank you for agreeing to be a panelist again. We really appreciate it. And last but certainly not least is Kerri Adcock of National Instruments. Unlike probably everyone else on this call, she is nearing her 18th year at National Instruments, which I think we should all just take a step back and go, wow, that's incredibly impressive. Lots of commitment there. National Instrument is very lucky to have you. She is currently establishing the testing and optimization program there. So thank you, Kerri, for joining us. We're glad to have you. Awesome. All right, so let's get started. So our topic today is prioritization. Last time we talked about ideation, and it was really hard to separate the two because a lot of the things that we were asking about ideation sort of bled over into prioritization. And I think as we talk about prioritization, there's going to be a lot of things that probably feed back into what are the idea intake requirements that you have. So feel free, if you have questions that are related more to ideation and prioritization, you can throw them in the TLC Slack as always. You can also take yourself off mute to ask questions, or if you are not on the TLC Slack or don't want to take yourself off mute, you can use the chat functionality within Zoom. So let's get started. I would like to start, so we have your pictures up. We've got Val, Merritt, and then Kerri, so we'll kind of go in that order just to get us started, because my first question is about what you do today. So how do you prioritize the requests that you receive today? And if you've tried multiple different methods, share with us what elements of those methods are part of your current method and why you made changes if you did. So I'll start with you, Val.
Sure, yeah. So right when we first started our optimization program at the AMA, that was right when like Pi and Wider Funnel was coming out with that. And so we're like, sounds good, read the blog post, I'll buy it. So we implemented that right from the get-go with our program. And one thing that I quickly realized, which I feel would carry over today,
Before you go into, can you explain for the group what Pi stands for?
Oh yeah, sure, sorry. So I think there's like a couple different tweaks to some of the letters, different flavors nowadays, but it's it's you're asking yourself 3 questions, so you can end up with a score at the end. And so you're asking, what's the potential to scale? Like, what's the room for improvement? The importance of the test, so how important it is to your business metric, like is it a primary KPI, a major conversion, or is it a micro conversion? And then the ease to get it out the door or ship it. Or I think this one could also be ease for rolling over to a winner if you had a winning test. And one of the things that we quickly realized is we already had like 100 tests by the time we brought our tool in, because we had been like ramping up excitement and having all these brainstorm meetings to get buy-in. And we wanted to use prioritization so we could see, what do we test first? And there wasn't one idea, and I would challenge anyone on this call, if you've had someone come to you to say, I have an awesome idea, but it's probably not going to make a big impact, it's probably not going to win, definitely isn't going to affect any of our KPIs, and it's going to be really hard to develop. So we ended up with like almost 0 differentiation in our scores because those questions were too subjective. And so I'm sure that we're going to get into some more of this later, but so now fast forward to what we're doing now at UBS. It's a version of PXL, and the PXL framework is, instead of asking yourself 3 questions, this is the conversion Excel model.
Yep.
A series of, I think, 12 is what they have, but they encourage you to customize it for your business, and that's what we've done. So we try to ask ourselves questions where there's binary yes, no answers, so that everyone who's submitting ideas are across My marketing and product teams could prioritize a test themselves. So it's not something that you need to be an analyst to do. You don't need to have access to, Adobe Analytics to dig into it yourself. It's really like easy and clear to see like what tests are going to give you your best opportunities by asking yourself this battery of questions that are, for the most part, as objective as we can make them.
Right.
And I would just say just one other thing is that as someone who's been on the client side, making sure that anyone can prioritize a test is 100% a goal of prioritization for me. Like I would almost rather eliminate a question if there's too much subjectivity than having a conversation or multiple conversations about why an answer to a question is that answer. Like a goal of our program is to actually never talk about prioritization. Like it is what it is. That's the score once you agreed upon it.
It takes the subjectivity out of it. And you don't have to play bad cop.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's always better. All right, Mr. Merritt.
So I will start by saying that I have tried as many models as I've come across and not found one that I think is practical enough for us. But what we do today is every idea that comes in, we assign on a 10-point score. We assign a value for impact. We assign a value for ease. We assign a value for confidence, and we assign a value for innovativeness.
What do you mean by confidence?
Confidence, how confident are you that this idea will work?
Okay.
But I say that, I would say impact and ease are really the ones that come into play most from like, should we do this idea or this idea, given that we have the choice? I think more often than not, the ideas that don't rank high for impact and ease are there because of other things. And I would say there's more than a little bit of art to our process. One is like trying to maximize our resources, so bringing in stuff that's low effort, but also ranks differently on other parameters to occupy all of our resources in a sprint. And also we want to make sure we're not just focusing on low-hanging fruit. And so we use that innovativeness score to make sure that we're sprinkling in the big ideas that have the potential to move the needle, but that we have like very low confidence in, or just, lots of uncertainty around, or maybe are more difficult to handle. But yeah, I mean, I would say our program is unique in that for most of the tests that the ideas that we're working on, tests that we're running, we don't have to answer to a lot of outside folks from our program. We're given a lot of autonomy to experiment and tinker with things as we see fit. And we reach out to other stakeholders as needed. And also sort of unique to our program is the fact that I have people coming in from different parts of the business who they don't report directly to me, and they're running tests, and I'm training them, and I'm spreading the culture of optimization. But as part of that, I want them to be excited about what they're doing, and so I try to
turn them down.
Yeah, I try to give them a lot of latitude about what they're doing, even if it's not something I agree with or I think is, I steer them, and we make sure we're acknowledging what the ratings are for these things. And I totally agree with like the binary objective approach, even though I think it's rarely totally objective, even when you try to do those things. But so I try to steer them in the directions to think about those things objectively and to compare them to other opportunities out there. But I do offer quite a bit of latitude to other folks in doing the things that they're excited about.
Makes sense. How about you, Kerri?
So at National Instruments, we are relatively new on this journey, even though I think we've been in this phase for about the last 2 years. We had kind of a good start, and then our whole marketing department totally, reorged. And I don't know with Val and Merritt, so we're running personalization as well as optimization in the same kind of strand, and so we're trying to kind of balance between the two. And really, I guess the process for prioritization that we're using today is really like value and effort, like pretty simple. And then how cool it is. We're still trying to show people like all the
That's
neat things.
Innovation.
Yeah, exactly. So we're kind of, have to balance. And I think it's similar to what Merritt said, like what what we want to do, that we think will show value that people just don't know to ask for yet, versus what the business wants from us. We have a monthly prioritization meeting where we sit and kind of go through, here are all the things that are in flight right now, here are all the things that are coming up, here are the things that we need to prioritize. Really, I kind of make a stab at it and kind of tell them, here's what I think we should do. And I haven't gotten a lot of pushback yet. So
nice.
I think that's good.
Hopefully not coming soon, but.
Exactly. So, and we again, we're pretty immature. We don't have a whole lot of ideas coming through yet. So it's more like about just trying to prove how awesome testing is and optimization and, what we can do with the program.
That's great. That's a good place to be, because then you can build the appropriate groundwork and foundation so that when you do have more ideas than you can do it, you'll be in a better position because they've got this whole history of you saying no.
Exactly. And we are, that's another thing that we are doing right now, is really focusing a lot on our processes, on our technical and development side. Like, they're really building out processes. So hopefully when we get lots of requests coming in, that we can really start moving and scaling.
Okay. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about, and I think, Val, you kind of started and gave us some hints about the issues that you've seen, but what problems have you seen with different prioritization models that you've tried, or with your current model? Where do they miss the mark? When do they work? What makes them fail?
Sorry, getting off of mute. So I think that the way that it fails, again, because like I've always been building programs where the goal is like a center of excellence model. And so like we measure our program health by, the percentage of tests that can be run on email or on web with how much involvement from the digital analytics team. Because as soon as we can like hand off a part of something, then we can focus on the next piece. Like we built a calculator so that sample size, and now you got that. So now we're going to move on to how do we build tools and training so that we can educate on the analysis side, which is, if you guys have any grains of wisdom on that, I'm definitely interested. But anyway, so that's always like where I've worked. And so then it's like training the next team and bringing and onboarding the next one. So again, like one of my goals is to make prioritization like as much as possible after we're all on the same page, like not a conversation point. So when things are more subjective, like that's when you get into like, it just turns into that whole who gets the homepage hero battle, like who's the extrovert, loudest person in the meeting, hippo, whatever. And so then it really just takes you away from the spirit of why you're prioritizing in the first place. Like, I mean, if you can't come up with a way to all agree what are your next best opportunities, then you might as well just, grab your favorite one from the top of the pile. So we actually, to Merritt's point about the innovative score, and then Kerri, yours about coolness, we tried to like, how do you make that binary? Like, yes, no, like that's not going to work. So we have this concept of asking ourselves questions that help us tease apart tests that are going to test for like the global maxima, like our newest, best, biggest ideas versus like refinement. I think that those fall secondary to like your big ideas, because you have a better opportunity of landing on your optimal variation at the end. So we ask ourselves questions like, are you adding elements, removing elements, moving things, new flow, new messaging strategy, versus are you editing something? Are you shifting something? So it's trying to get at like the types of changes. And so I think there's 2 or 3 questions that we ask, again, building off of PXL, to try to tease apart big opportunities and big ideas versus things that we might prioritize later after we have more of the page optimized or the email template optimized, if that makes sense. So we even tried to put a little science around that, but I completely agree with your point, Merritt, that as hard as you try, like things are still going to be somewhat subjective. And just because a test score is a 1, does that mean that I'm not going to test it if like the CMO is like, this is our best, test this quarter, like everyone gets a freebie now and again. And ideally you'd have the data on the back end to prove whether or not you should test his ideas more, or why maybe we shouldn't waste that opportunity. So but that's where I've seen like the biggest successes is when I can get every one of my stakeholders for whatever program, whether it's marketing or product, to agree on how we choose what to do next, and then making that really transparent.
Makes sense. Where have you seen it fail or work, Merritt?
So I have 2 big problems with most of the models out there. The first is that I think they fail to acknowledge the importance of what I like to call strategic impetus, right? It's
Big words.
and it's not a static value is one of the problems, right? So like this is where the requester comes into play, right? Is it an executive? Because even if, you know, we don't want to listen to hippos all the time, but we do have to listen to hippos most of the time. And so like the attention of that request, right, and how core it is to some of the strategic issues of the month, the week, the quarter, the year, you know, the salience within the organization. How hot of a topic is this with others, and the urgency of the issue. The notion of is this something that will be implemented anyway? Right? Is this going to happen
if I don't test it? Are they going to go just put it out there?
Right?
Yeah.
So like it's risky, and you can let someone blow up your conversion metrics by doing that kind of stuff. But like these kind of things, I think of like impact and effort. They're relative. Like you can assign relatively static and relatively objective values to them. But there can be so many things that impact the strategic impetus of a project that it can, you know, it being a dynamic value, it can take over everything. And I like to use the analogy of like, you know, those graduated cylinders, right, from like 8th grade biology class or whatever, like
chemistry, but yeah.
Yeah, well, whatever. I didn't major in any science. I think of like impact and ease as being like stones that you can put in there, right? And they stay the same size. And I think of priority as being like the level of the water that gets in there. But I think of strategic impetus as the amount of water that you put in. So like that can totally overtake the impact and the ease of a project, and it can happen on a dime. So that's my first big problem. My second big problem is all of the models out there that I've seen, whether they're assigning objective scores or subjective scores, right? They like create this split between these different types of ways to prioritize. And what I don't see is someone acknowledging that, like, look, the balance of impact to ease to strategic impetus is going to be different for everybody, right? Like you may want to make your decisions based 20% on ease, 60% on impact.
But the weighting is different depending on who you ask.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's ideal for your organization? If you're a new organization, you're really looking for impact. You know, it may be different at different organizations.
And if you're leading the dev team, you're most concerned about ease because you're trying to keep your people happy.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't see those being weighted differently according to the organization often enough. And honestly, like the PXL, like there's all these objective ratings, but it's like it really doesn't pay any credence to, like, you know, these are all similar type of ratings. Like this should account for 20% of your score.
That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't really thought about the different, I mean, I've thought about weighting the different things differently. So for example, maybe we have a particular strategic initiative that I need to tie a certain percentage because I've promised that I've committed that, you know, 60% of the tests that we run in Q3 are going to be tied to such and such strategic initiative. So obviously that's a weighting factor, and I need to apply that weighting factor to say, hey, if it is or is not tied to a certain strategic initiative. But what I haven't thought about is the weighting factor for the other elements, and that what I think that weighting factor should be would be different than what someone else would. And how would you address for that? Which is really interesting, because at first when you were saying different people's responses would be different based on their perspective, I was like, yeah, but that's okay, because you have 5 different people all score it, and then you take the average. But you're not talking about the score, you're talking about the weighting of the individual scores. It's interesting. I need to think on that a little bit more. Kerri, do you have anything to add? Or?
Well, so I guess, you know, just I've done a lot of reading over the last couple of years, and when, you know, we started this program, I was thinking, well, yeah, definitely PI is the way to go, or, you know, one of these, because I get all excited about process and scoring, and, you know, I found that it was a barrier to getting any requests, you know, for people to have to make those decisions and say how how impactful they think it's going to be or estimate a lift. And so for us getting started, we've kind of, like I mentioned, we kind of scrapped all of that, and it's more about, what do we think is going to be the business value? What are we, what campaigns are we working on right now? And then again, kind of the coolness factor, kind of, I want a little bit of wow in there so people will start talking about it. So at some point, I hope to get back into a little bit more of a, let's, I don't know, make it make sense or prioritization, by some kind of data. But right now, it's not really our priority.
Not necessary quite yet.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It's not a priority.
It's not a priority. Prioritizing is not a priority.
So hold on, because you guys are talking about innovation and the coolness factor, and I get that, and I can't remember which one of you actually talked about, we're trying to learn how to do new things. Maybe that was you, Kerri, and therefore you wanted to give maybe higher weighting to something that maybe wouldn't have as much of an impact or be as easy or whatever, but it's something we haven't tried before and we're trying to learn.
Right.
That, to me, that use case is really interesting. And I'm curious, Merritt, Val, have you guys come up with a situation where you're like, well, this may not be the best use case, but we really want to try this new, whatever testing tool you're on, and they've got a new algorithm or something. You're wanting to try it out and kind of see how it works.
Yeah, I got talked into testing out a chatbot on Facebook. We hardly get any interaction on Facebook, like a couple of chats a day, and half of them are spammy. But this is something that generates a lot of buzz internally, and it's so hot right now. So we did it, and it took more effort than it really should have, and it was successful, and it's going to lead to other experiments with chatbots. But we put that forward because it's it keeps us moving towards the cutting edge. We're not approaching the cutting edge quite yet, but
you're not bleeding.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We want to be close, but not maybe standing on it. Gotcha. Yeah. All right. That's cool. I just, that's interesting. I love the idea of pushing the envelope, but not letting it get too much in the way. Because I have seen organizations, they're just they're running so fast that they've literally got the cart before the horse, and they're like, we're going to go do all this new stuff that they're really not ready for. But allowing still space for that innovation, I think that's a great idea. So, well, let's move on. Let's talk about what are the benefits or drawbacks. And I think, Kerri, I'm actually going to start with you this time because I think you were going in that direction already. If you think about having a set prioritization methodology, how does that help? And in your case, I think maybe how does it hold you back? Because you just said, if I ask them to provide this information.
I think it would definitely help. I feel like we have some political issues, that we're dealing with. And I think that would kind of take the touchy-feely part of it out if we had some kind of, at least baseline prioritization,
right.
Something pretty easy that kind of sets some tests apart from the other ones. But yeah, again, it was hurting us because my intake form kind of got longer and longer, or the questions made people think in a way that they weren't used to thinking. And I was spending a lot of time helping people fill out these intake forms, and it never was really making it, to be anything fruitful.
So there's a way to solve that without getting rid of your prioritization methodology. Don't make it part of your intake.
Well, that's true. Well, and so we backed away from that. And then if we decided we were going to do it, then we would have a meeting, and then kind of talk through some of those things and not make it like a form to fill out, like a barrier. Yeah. It was more as part of the conversation of once we had kind of decided yeah, let's do this. And I think that was kind of the gradual way of kind of getting away from it. And, and again, we don't have a ton of requests coming through. And so, me just making the first stab at it right now is working. So.
Until it becomes too much for one person to.
Exactly. Yeah. And then we need something like Val said, I don't even want to have to think about prioritization. I want to, open something up and there's my list.
So let's skip to you, Val. What are the benefits or drawbacks that you see?
So really quick, I'll say for context that I kind of see generally two types of tests. Some that are very specific to a certain page or a template or a campaign. And then there's those ideas that are bigger and kind of agnostic to where you can test it. And those are the ones where I never find issue with prioritization. But if something is campaign specific, we were trying to decide how do we add that what would be the missed opportunity if we didn't test in this campaign? Like, what's that urgency factor? And so that's the only thing that really like routes around prioritization. That's not a part of our intake. It's because if the whole idea is to make sure that we're not missing out on opportunity, we would be remiss if we just said, well, nope, we have to test this next, even though that's not what's there. So we have to be practical about it. So just to say that that's, when it comes to like deciding what's next, it's not just sorting by score top one first, right?
Sure.
So the other concept is, just to bring it back, I'm going to take a page out of Merritt and go back to physics. And if you think about like sine waves, so if you think
Sure.
about, so we take our like top chunk of tests and then sort by effort, because we can pick up one test at a time. That's like a huge drain on development resources. But then we can pick up some of those medium or those small little blips. And so if I have enough traffic to support it, if I can set up the swim lanes, like that's how we really break it out, is because the effort is like right now, like for our business and the headcount that we have dedicated to testing, that's the bottleneck. And so we try to prioritize around those resources, but I could totally see a time when it's, you know, a different type of bottleneck and maybe we would use a different set of criteria, but it's, that's like where it works best. And I would say that with those creative one-shot opportunities, you know, something like we think a lot of our testing in relation to like media, because we're headline driven within research. And so if we don't talk about Brexit, when Brexit happens, when are we going to talk about Brexit? A year later when we want to run that test? That's not a thing. So
Sure. I don't know. People are still talking about it, but I get your point. What about you, Merritt? Benefits, drawbacks?
So you shared a couple of articles as like primers for the discussion here. I thought one of those was very succinct about what I think the benefits are. I mean, transparency, right? So like everyone can know why things are in that are in. It helps you to manage expectations. So if you can be clear about how you're making decisions, then, you know, people stop questioning your decisions as much. At least in theory,
at least
right?
It gives you something to point to, right?
Yeah. It's not me, it's the model. Look at the model. Your idea sucks because of the model. It's not me. I mean, I like it personally. But...
Exactly.
No, and then the other, I think, is managing opportunity costs and making sure that, you know, holding yourself accountable to working on the things that are going to have great impact while you're not ignoring other things.
Yeah. So all of those are benefits. Do you see any drawbacks?
To prioritization?
Yeah.
Time and effort and occasional personal embarrassment when you know, you sort of expose yourself, right, to be judged by those same criteria.
Your ideas or you?
Your decisions. So there have been times when we've sat down and looked at it as a team, and I've said like, yeah, I want to get this into the sprint, and then we look at the priority ratings and it doesn't quite stack up.
You're like, oh, but my standards are different. Let me put a little finger on the scale.
Yeah, strategic impetus. That's what it is.
There you go. That's why he uses it. All right. Do you think, guys, that different organizations need different models, or is there such a thing as a one size fits all?
I can go first. I definitely don't think there's a one size fits all. I think that is our prioritization model perfect? Does it work every time? Like, absolutely not. I'm definitely not claiming it. But I think customizing an objective criteria to what's meaningful to our business and what our priorities are has been what's been successful, which also means you need to revisit it if priorities change. And the prioritization criteria I use with my email marketing team is different than what I use for my team that's focused on web within marketing, different than product, like a different set of questions, especially when you get into effort. Because the opportunity cost of switching a subject line is like nothing compared to like a new flow on your site, right? So I think customizing it as much as possible and getting buy-in, like that's what I would say is the formula for success. Is not definitely just any one thing.
So before we jump to the others, you described a different prioritization for different roadmaps within the same organization. don't you also then have to prioritize whatever comes to the top for each of those prioritization models, or do they not share resources?
Not shared resources.
Oh,
and so
that's
that's
nice.
why that work. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Kerri, Merritt?
I mean, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but just from what I've read and what I can see, with us, like, I don't think the same model works anywhere, and I don't think the same model works for the same company for a long period of time. Like,
Yeah.
Just what I've seen with NI, how we've changed how we talk about things. Like, I could already see, like, adjustments that we'd need to make.
As you need to start pushing back more and narrowing the funnel a little.
Yep.
Which is not something you're worried about now,
right.
but eventually.
We will be.
Yeah.
I agree. I don't think there's any way that you could recommend the same type of model for everyone. I mean, I think you could say, like, you ought to go about this the same sort of way to everybody, right? Like, trying to be as objective as possible, like doing ones and zeros around the impact and the ease.
Mm-hmm.
And staying as close as you can to company strategy, keeping a balance of long-term objectives and short-term objectives, maximizing your resources, and then I think being flexible, like, has to apply to most organizations, but maybe not all organizations. Some organizations are very, very data driven, and so, like, if there's not an objective number on it, like, it's not going to go anywhere, and that's probably a good thing in a lot of cases. In some cases, maybe not. But then I think, like, the maturity of the organization too, like Kerri and myself, we're very conscious of how others are looking at the testing and optimization program, and we want to build enthusiasm, and we want to keep people engaged. And so, like, you think long and hard about saying no to someone who has a test request because of that, right? Like, you want to build that excitement, and that's hard to build into a model. You have to choose your battles. You need
the hippo waiting. You just add that little, yeah.
It's not always a hippo, though. Like,
That's true.
It's whoever's requesting. And so it's like, it's managing all those things, and it's just going to be a very different conversation, I think, where we go.
It's interesting. I didn't hear any of you say something about some sort of weighting or scoring associated to the person who requested it based on that person's successful submissions in the past. And I think that came up when we were talking about ideation, is this idea of weighting based on win rate. So if Merritt is really good at coming up with ideas that are more likely to be successful, and Merritt gives us a new idea, we're going to put our thumb on the scale and give it a little extra boost in the prioritization rating because we trust that Merritt's ideas are good.
So I think that's interesting. For me, that plays into our confidence score. But I will say, I think the confidence score is really interesting. I saw some graphic, I think it was at CXL Live this year or last year, but someone was arguing that the value of a winning test can be measured by how confident you were in that idea, right? The less confident you were in an idea, the more value you got out of testing that idea, if it's a winner.
Interesting, because otherwise, why didn't you just go do it? You didn't need to test it.
Right.
So
that kind of spins things a little bit for me, and I haven't quite sorted out what to do with that. But
so what if the confidence wasn't in the solution, but in the existence of the problem? There's something to address here.
Yeah.
And I'm very confident that there's something wrong. And then we have these hypotheses that we're going to test.
I think those both come into play.
It'd be interesting to see. Okay, why don't you go and edit your model and then come back and let us know.
One of the things I just wanted to throw out there is if someone comes to me with a good idea and they've entered it and they looked at the prioritization in our tool and they're disappointed in the score for whatever reason, that's where I want to have a conversation with them about it. Not about, like, how do we, like,
education
do that from an 8 to a 9, but is there a lower level of effort way to test out what you're thinking here, the spirit of why you want to put this forward? And so that would decrease your ease score, right? Or we can, is there a way that we could test this on the homepage? I would never say that, but is there a way we could test on a higher traffic page so that it's like
a bigger audience, a better KPI? Yeah,
exactly. So and that's helping them educate on like how to have a really good high value test idea and less about the score itself. And so that's what I think is like I've had a lot of really valuable conversations come out of that.
Yeah, and I think that came up during ideation, and that's the part of the benefit of having a solid ideation intake process is the education of the people submitting the ideas. And if you include in the submission process the content that you need for prioritization, there's got to be some education that happens there too. What were you gonna
I think that's a really interesting insight. Because you may have to go through prioritization more than once with an idea. Something that's early stage could be executed a million different ways, and some of them may be really easy and not answer the question so well, and some of them may be really, really hard but give you a very precise answer.
Right.
And so we do find that, we break up ideas as they go into our sprints. We break them up in like, maybe this is a scoping one, or maybe we're going to just run ideation during this sprint on this concept, and then we'll reprioritize things the next time they come around as the ideas get developed.
Oh, interesting. So you don't do them at the same time?
Not necessarily, no.
Yes, you don't have to. Yeah.
Yeah, there's different aspects that need to be
because you're doing the prioritization, not the intake. The person submitting the idea isn't the one that is you don't have it automated like what Val was.
Well, we do. So it's part of, we do, but I reserve the right to change the scores.
Wow. That's fair.
Good rationale, but yes. It isn't a
Okay.
part of my intake, but you can't drag a test over from like idea to like in planning until it has a score. So
Nice.
don't force you to do it when you give me the idea, because I want as little friction as possible there. But don't you dare drag a test idea over to planning until it has a score associated. That's kind of where we interject in the process.
I like that. That makes sense. The dragging you're describing are you using Trello? What are you using?
We're using oh my god, effective experiments.
Oh,
Nice.
gotcha. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go right back to Merritt saying, but I reserve the right, because the next question that I have is it realistic to strictly abide by a model? Why or why not, Merritt?
I have not found it to be realistic, honestly. It's been really, really hard.
It's too much in the real world because we live there, right?
Yep. Yeah, because of those things, again, that I bucket very broadly under strategic impetus, that can blow up your roadmap.
Have you found that the more you adjust your score or your prioritization based on those uncontrollable moving things, the more churn and disruption that you have in your design and dev? And
Yes.
so how do you control for that?
I'll let you know when I figure it out. I will say one thing. So I did go through an exercise a while back where I thought our model was like maybe overly simplistic, because we do use our model, right? We use the values that get put in to make decisions, but it's not so strict as it could be. And I went through and I looked at all the tests that we'd run, and I assigned very granular, detailed, objective ratings to these things based on all the criteria I could think of, like everything from like the title and the importance of the person who requested it, down to like how many eyeballs were going to see this, and like how impactful were we expecting this to be. And I looked at like, was our prioritization for this stuff, was it accurate? Like, was it good? Like, would I have gained anything by doing a more precise, prioritization exercise? And
Right.
I didn't. Like, I
So,
found we
so
made
you looked at tests that you had already run
Yep.
and you acted like you were prioritizing them with a more complex model, and you said, hey, we still would have run them regardless. The model we had was sufficient and less difficult to.
Yeah, I found that, we made pretty good decisions. Like we didn't.
Did you look at the ones that were rejected?
Well, I looked at everything that was in our queue.
Which
right?
would
Like
include the stuff that
we
fell
haven't
out.
worked on. Yeah.
Interesting. Val, have you considered like tweaking your model to like cut things off and see if they're missed?
We've done a little bit of that. I mean, we've made some changes to the model, and so I want a little bit more history to build up. But I would say that, yeah, I think that it's absolutely reasonable to have a working model, 100%, and that's like the basis of our conversation. So I'm not a robot about it after I have those scores, and so that's why I think it's really valuable and it works for us, because I have far too many ideas to read through every single one every time we want to get to a spot to decide what's next. And if I'm trying to be judicious about resources, I want to be like testing where the action happens. But a goal of our program, because I am working with like 100% known audience, these are actual UBS institutional investor clients, is wins are fantastic, but so are saves. Like, what did we save ourselves if it was a loss? And also, if I'm confident that there's no difference, that also lets me know what doesn't move the needle. So we measure things by like an insight rate. So a test that's inconclusive or that we have to refield, those are the only ones that we really like count against ourselves. And so if we look at where the tests that we were able to drive an insight from, were those highly prioritized, and we do see a correlation there. But I haven't gone as detailed as Merritt's talking about, like going back, especially with expanding on those questions. But that's a really interesting exercise. I think that's something that I'll take back.
Awesome.
I want to know more about your insight rate.
Yeah, I know, right? Does it sound familiar, Merritt? Actionable insight rate, maybe? Oh, the days. Kerri, do you have any examples of where the prioritization that you are using, that you've said, okay, based on complexity and likely impact, this test probably shouldn't be done, but we're going to do it anyway?
Yeah, I think, and we're not at high velocity either right now, so it takes us a while. And so I think things change in the business that makes us, that we'll change our mind, or we'll push something up in priority that we've kind of been talking about for a while. And then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, it's go time. Let's get it. So I definitely think, that things are going to change over time, and we change our minds a lot.
And you, I assume, experience the same impact of churn for your dev, and yeah.
Yep.
And it just is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, we can't fight it.
I had a client that had a really interesting, one of their metrics for judging their program, and it wasn't just for the optimization. They had a huge dev team that supported multiple programs. And part of the decision about how much dev time you were allotted was related to your dev churn rate.
Oh, wow.
The amount of dev work that got thrown out the door,
right?
Because you had changing priorities. If your percentage was higher than the other team was more likely to get a larger percentage of dev resources. Look at Merritt's eyes. He's thinking, guys.
I just think that's interesting. Like, I'm trying to imagine how that would play out here. I feel like a lot of the churn that happens here is often chalked up to bad communication between teams. Like, I think you'd have a hard time like pinning blame.
Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something, right?
Yep.
So, Merritt, was this you that gave the example question here about legislation?
Yeah.
I thought it sounded like you. Okay, so Merritt asks the question. So I'm going to let you ask the question, Merritt.
I was trying to compare, as I've gone through prioritization thought exercises, I'm trying to compare like how prioritization here works with other types of prioritization. And one of the analogies that I came up with was how legislation gets passed,
Or
right?
not.
Or not. Like, ultimately, that happens by dollars, like power and influence, and by popularity, like, voting. And that seems to decide what stuff moves forward and what doesn't. And I think frankly, I think there's a lot of parallels there between what I've seen and experienced. So I don't know, throw that out there, like compare, contrast.
All right. Have any of you seen the model yet where what you test is based on which test gets the most votes? Nobody's seen it?
Well, so we do that in our ideation process. We do voting on ideas, but that's not binding.
Pre-prioritization, so you're not like putting it on the roadmap that way.
No. It's, I mean, at that point, the idea itself, the hypothesis, is something that we're already working on, and we're just looking at testing developing the solution out. And so we will put votes on that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not binding. It's just like, hey, you want to go for the ideas that create the most buzz, but ultimately you have to consider more than that.
Interesting. There was, I think it was actually, I can't remember if it was Exchange or DA Hub. I feel like it was in Berlin though, but somebody was talking about how they added votes that were actually like dollar bills, and they pinned dollar bills to the cube walls to the person whose ideas they were. And whoever got the most dollar bills, that's what, and they were reused, like they used the dollar bills, but they used like dollar votes. And then if your idea won, you got to keep your dollars. Of course, you kept using them for voting, but I found that idea interesting, maybe with Monopoly money or poker chips, but I find it interesting, but it does worry me that only the most popular ideas will move forward, and maybe those aren't the best or the most impactful or the most innovative, or maybe only the innovative ideas and the continuous, sometimes not as sexy, continuous improvement iterations that we all know and love, maybe those wouldn't get done.
I kind of like that idea to kind of get some buzz started. I mean, not the whole program runs that way, but just to kind of build some excitement, or involve some other teams in something, and put some
put
slides
some
around
in the game.
yeah, exactly. Put some slides around the company and get some just different ideas that we don't think about.
Yeah, do a which test one style.
Exactly.
Hey, make your bet.
Yep.
Maybe whoever wins gets a cupcake or something.
Yeah.
Why not? At least get people involved. Maybe not prioritization.
Right.
The last time we bet on the outcome of a test, it was a massive embarrassment for some senior leaders.
Because they lost?
They lost in an astounding way.
Yeah. So that's actually, okay, so it may have embarrassed them, but to me, that's where you get to push forward and say, this is why we test. This is why we have a program. This is optimization 101. I even have a slide. You guys have probably all seen the picture of the 24-hour fitness and the guy going up the escalator instead of the stairs. And we test because what we think we know about our customers is often wrong. Mm-hmm. We assume if you're going to 24-hour fitness, you're going to take the stairs. But we have photographic evidence of our customers taking the escalator instead. So I think that's actually, I mean, they may not have liked it, but I think it gives your program a solid support.
Yeah. No, it did.
Val, you were going to say something. I kind of cut you off. I'm sorry.
No. We vote for, we did an AMA on a blog, and we do it on a whiteboard at UBS, and you put your name down. So it's very transparent. Merritt was saying, which one do you think will win? There's an explanation of the test, the whole thing. And to this day, out of all the testing we've done, the majority has never voted for the winning variation. And I consider that a huge, I put that in my decks when I'm doing my little dog and pony on, what has the testing program done for the organization? It's never has the organization, the mind meld crowd ever thought the correct version would win, the majority.
So this is not our topic for today, but in the past we've talked about how do we value, actually calculate ROI of your optimization program. And in the example you just gave, if you had selected the non-winner, which the popular crowd would have selected, you could actually go back and calculate the financial impact of your optimization program, or at least the opportunity cost of not having it, which would be kind of cool. We should all keep records like that, huh? Yay, learning libraries. All right, well, we have about 5 minutes left. If anybody has any questions, now's your chance. Speak now, forever hold your peace. You can ask them in the TLC Slack, in the Zoom chat, or take yourself off mute. Dylan says there was once a betting system built into the ideation system, but had to be stopped because some leaders were betting on the control every time. Can't tell somebody their baby's ugly.
House wins, right?
The house always wins. Anyone, any questions?
So Kelly, this is Christina. I have a question.
Go for it.
So when we're talking about prioritization and we're talking about, different ideations, how do we make room for testing iterations? So we've finally tested this big idea, whether it be a redesign or something small, but then taking the observations from that test and making iterations, how do we put that into the pecking order? That's
a great question. So basically it's, like I was saying, the iterations are less exciting and less sexy. They don't tend to, their impacts are often less because you've already made some improvements and now you want to go a little step further. So you've got an incremental improvement. And obviously you don't want to just stop once you've learned that maybe a particular layout is better than an old layout. Now we want to optimize the layout. And sometimes if you're just using a static prioritization model, those things may not bubble to the top, right?
Sure, right. And so would you just, satisfy the requester by doing that kind of at the same time as another test that you're running and then just give them a test summary? Or would you make that as, big of an impact as the first test?
Right. Now, I know I have my own thoughts, but I want to give Val, Merritt, Kerri. You guys have any thoughts on that? How do you make sure that the continuous improvement iterations bubble to the top?
I think, going back to what idea sources tend to have a higher win rate, I think iterative tests definitely have a higher win rate than, new out of the blue ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I think the way it rolls into your prioritization can differ by the organization, but like if you're using a confidence score, it should definitely boost your confidence, right? The source of idea should definitely weigh into your confidence score.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's other ways you could approach it, but.
Yeah, I've seen the yes, no format like Val's describing for hers, where one of the questions is this an iteration or is this supported by evidence? And the evidence might be data and analysis, or it could be a prior test.
Exactly.
That's where it's coming to play in my program. We always ask.
Yep. And that gives it a boost. The fact that it is an iteration is actually a positive, not a negative.
Great, thanks.
Just because nobody else has a question yet, I also want to say that I have seen where you prioritize remember how Merritt and I were talking about solutions versus problems. So I've seen a program where our prioritization methodology where you don't prioritize the solutions, the hypotheses, the individual tests. Instead, you prioritize the problems. And so each problem may have a roadmap associated with it, which would be that continuous iteration. And, whether or not it bubbles to the top is the importance of the problem you're trying to solve. Or problem is a term that we use for maybe it's a business problem or a business goal or a business objective or a strategic initiative, but there's a roadmap associated with it.
So it's interesting you mentioned that. We do a monthly review of all the activity in our program. Mm-hmm. And in this deck, there's 2 slides that are always dedicated to what the question is. The title of the slide is, what are the biggest strategic priorities? Mm-hmm. And they're not always problems, but they're always issues, right? And so I include those in there to keep us focused on solving the big issues.
Yep.
I remember we at one point had a relationship with Clearhead, and they built a whole like product around like their problem solution mapping, and that's sort of like the same idea.
Tim Wilson knows something about that. All right. Well, we are 1 minute to the end of our call, and I want to just send a reminder out there. Our next call, I think, is scheduled for the end of September, and it's listed as a placeholder because it'll depend on our panelists. But right now, the topic says 1 versus 2 TLT test. I'm not sure that's a full hour worth of conversation, and I've had several people submit other questions related to the math. And I know we've had a statistics conversation before, but this is more not as deep and complex, but I've had people ask questions like, how do I power the test appropriately so that I have enough sample size? Or how do I, if I'm choosing an algorithm, do I want it to be a multi-arm bandit versus, I don't know what else is out there. What are the different automation options I have? What data do I need to consider? That kind of questions. And so I'm kind of thinking of broadening the scope a little bit based on that. So if you have more of a data science or statistics background, and you would be interested in doing sort of a Q&A, I would love to have you on the panel where you can help people make decisions like that about how long they should run a test, if they should use one-tailed or two-tailed, when does it make sense to do a full factorial versus fractional or partial factorial, those types of questions, and we'd love to have you. So reach out, let me know if you're interested, and thanks everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Kelly.